We are getting new information about the Epstein investigation. A judge in New York has ordered a hearing for next Tuesday, and the judge says if victims want to speak, he will let them. And this comes as we're learning more about Jeffrey Epstein's alleged criminal activities. New lawsuits filed by 3 women this week accuse Epstein of raping them or subjecting them to forced sex acts.
One of the women says the late Manhattan financier continued his criminal behavior while he was on work release from the Palm Beach County Jail in Florida in 2008. Each woman describes how Epstein manipulated them using his wealth and connections.
So joining me now is Casey Frank. He's a senior editor for the Miami Herald. Thank you so much for joining us, Casey. Walk us through.
Good morning.
Good morning. Walk us through this new information that we're learning from these lawsuits.
Well, the lawsuits really fill in some of the gaps that that have been empty so far. We found, for instance, in the lawsuits that Mr. Epstein's alleged behavior continued after completing his short jail sentence down here in South Florida. We also learned, according to the lawsuits, that Mr. Epstein was reaching out to women while he was in work release and while he was allegedly under the supervision of various sheriff deputies in plain clothes and luring in women to have sex behind closed doors. The lawsuits also brought the sexual behavior beyond South Florida, his home on the waterfront in Palm Beach, to Mr. Epstein's palatial house up in Manhattan, as well as his other homes. So it told us a lot more about the breadth of Mr. Epstein's activities and the way it extended after the jail sentence he served.
It is astounding. He continued his sexual activities during work release. How was that allowed to happen?
Well, that's something that we're very interested in finding out, and we've requested various records from the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office, which runs the jail in Palm Beach. And as a result of some of our reporting and the reporting of others, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement is embarked on an investigation of exactly that. Now, we did receive a large records dump late on Friday, actually too late to talk to the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office about some of what was in there, but it did give a lengthy list of the names of the sheriff's deputies who were providing security for Mr. Epstein, and that's what they called it. They called it security. It was not guarding him in the sense that he was an inmate. It was providing security in the sense that he was considered a client of theirs. And if you read their sort of after shift reports, it was clear that they deferred to Mr. Epstein. They wore suits by contract instead of their sheriff's uniforms, and they would sometimes express great relief that he was happy with the service he was providing. Now, a couple of interesting details. Number one, and we expected this, and we had heard this, one of the more interesting records that would tell us a whole lot no longer exists, according to the sheriff. That record would be a daily log of who visited Mr. Epstein while he was in work release all those months. And that, of course, would dovetail with some of the information that was in these lawsuits filed yesterday. What the sheriff's office says is that log, which was kept in a safe every day, sort of an indication of how sensitive it was, has been destroyed under the Public Records Acts in the state of Florida, which say after 5 years certain records can be destroyed. It doesn't say they must be, but it says they can. Another interesting detail is we looked at the things that Mr. Epstein bought in the commissary. And in addition to the usual things that one might expect, hair gel, toothpaste, he was able to buy two girl-size sets of panties, and that's something that we would have liked to have asked the sheriff's Department about, but we did not get the chance. You might wonder why you could buy those in a men's jail. Well, he's actually in the stockade, and the stockade serves both male and female inmates, although in different parts of the stockade.
It just gets stranger.
Nonetheless,
Casey,
yeah,
let me ask you this, though.
We're told that's not supposed to happen.
Yeah, well, I wonder why. But given everything that you've just said about the situation in Florida and what we've been learning about the fact that in New Mexico he wasn't even required to register as a sex offender, is it a stretch to think that maybe some of his enablers were in law enforcement?
Well, it depends on how you define enablers, but certainly the actions of the sheriff of Palm Beach and some of his deputies are very much under scrutiny. So, for that matter, are the actions of Alexander Acosta, who was the U.S. Attorney for Southern Florida and who okayed the original deal that threw this case out of state court, where he could have been put away for life, and sent it to the state courts, where he got this very lenient sentence. So those two investigations are ongoing, as well as the investigation in the U.S. Department of Prisons, where somehow he was able to end up being hanged despite the fact that he had exhibited behavior that suggested he was at risk of doing exactly that.
Casey, before we let you go, I just want to go back to these two young women that were able to visit him on work release. In any of the documents that you've read, was there any indication as to what the reasons were that they were allowed to visit, or whether it was an excuse or a legitimate reason?
No, there's nothing in the records that we've seen. I think we can imagine what the reason might have been. And of course, if you read the lawsuits, they allege very clearly that the reason was to have sex behind closed doors.
But they didn't say, they were part of the legal team, or, just I'm wondering, just what do you say to explain why these two young women have shown up?
Honestly, I do not know. Now, there was one interesting detail in the records as well that said there was a back door to Mr. Epstein's office at the downtown office building, where his science foundation set up shop. And so that could have had something to do with this, if in fact there was a back door, and that's precisely what one of the records says, and we're trying to look into that a little bit more.
Well, a story that will not go away. Casey Frank, thanks so much.
Thank you.